All right, let's dive into a pretty radical idea today. What if the biggest tax you pay isn't actually to the government? We're going to break down a really interesting framework that tries to measure these invisible economic forces that quietly drain your most valuable resource, which of course is your time. You know that feeling, right? That sense that no matter how hard you work, there's this invisible hand that's always reaching into your pocket and taking its cut. Well, the framework we're looking at today takes that feeling really seriously. It basically reimagines Adam Smith's famous invisible hand, but not as some abstract philosophical idea. It treats it as something real, something you can actually put a price tag on.
So, the core idea here is that we're all living under two different tax systems. First, you've got your public taxes, the ones we all see on our pay stubs, the ones politicians are always debating. But then there's this second, hidden system that the source material calls private taxes. And they are totally invisible. Nobody debates them. They're just kind of woven into the cost of almost everything we buy.
Okay, so here's our game plan. We're going to start by taking a closer look at that hand in our pocket. Then we'll talk about a whole new currency to measure its impact. After that, we'll compare 3 different ways services get delivered, uncover the hidden numbers, and finally see how this all plays out in the real world. First up, the hand in your pocket. So the argument here is that Adam Smith's invisible hand has kind of morphed over time from just a metaphor into this big economic idea that we rarely even question anymore. But what if instead of just debating the philosophy of it, we actually started measuring the cost of it? Well, that's exactly what this framework is designed to do. Okay, but to measure a cost like that, you need the right kind of currency, right? And that brings us right into our second section, a currency of lifetime. The whole point here is that we need to stop thinking in dollars and cents and start thinking about something a lot more fundamental. I mean, think about it. The basic problem with using money to measure things is that it's just not stable. Its value is always shifting around because of inflation or where you live. A dollar in one city isn't the same as a dollar in another. And a dollar today, it's barely a shadow of what it was decades ago. So it's actually a pretty terrible yardstick for measuring the true cost of something over time. And this is the framework's really clever alternative. An hour of your life is an hour of your life, period. It's the one currency that is perfectly stable and it's distributed equally to every single person on the planet. So the real question isn't how much does it cost, but how many of your precious, finite hours do you have to trade for it? So this powerful idea gets formalized into something called the Lifetime Efficiency Index, or LTE for short. And really, it's just a tool. It's a tool designed to answer one single crucial question. How much of your entire working life is eaten up just paying for the basic cost of living? All right, so how do we actually use this LTE index in the real world? Well, the framework applies it by comparing 3 totally different models for how we get our essential services. This lets us do a real apples-to-apples comparison of what they truly cost us in our time. So basically, you've got 3 buckets. You have Model A, the public system, government-run, tax-funded. Then there's Model C, the private sector model. That's your typical for-profit corporation where the main goal is making money for shareholders. And smack in the middle, you have Model B, the cooperative or nonprofit model, which is run democratically by its members for its members. Now, what's really important is that this framework uses the cooperative model as its baseline, its benchmark for efficiency. And you might ask, why that one? Well, because in theory, it offers the best of both worlds. You get the democratic accountability you'd see in a public system, plus the efficiency of a private one. But, and this is key, without the primary goal being to extract profit for shareholders. Okay, and now we get to the really juicy part. We're going to put some actual numbers on all of this to make that invisible cost finally visible. So let's take a look at the worked example from the source material. Imagine a single essential service. Could be your internet, could be home insurance. To pay for it under the public model, you need to work 100 hours a year. Under the cooperative model, that drops to just 80 hours. But under the private model, a whopping 250 hours. And I mean, this chart just lays it all out, doesn't it? The jump to that private model isn't a small step up, it's a massive leap. We're talking about a huge increase in the amount of your life you have to trade away for the very same service. Let's put a hard number on that comparison. The private delivery model costs you 2.5 times more of your life than the public one does. 250 hours of your time versus 100. It's a huge difference.
And believe it or not, the gap gets even wider when you compare it to the most efficient model, the cooperative. Against that baseline, the private model costs over 3 times as much of your life. 3.1 times, to be exact.
The source has a really powerful name for this huge gap. It calls it the structural fingerprint of extraction. I mean, to put it simply, the extra time cost that the private model piles on is it's enormous. It's way, way bigger than any little efficiency differences between the other two models. And the argument is a gap this big, that's not just about operational costs. That's about something else entirely.
So these numbers are pretty jarring, right? But you might be wondering, is this all just theoretical?
Well, that brings us to our final section, alternatives in action. This is where we get to see how these ideas actually play out in the real world.
The source uses housing as a perfect example, and it points to places like China, Singapore, and Vienna. Now, their systems are all very different from each other, but they all share one key idea. They treat housing less like a speculative asset to make money on and more like a piece of essential public infrastructure. And the result? A dramatically lower time cost for the people who live there.
And this really gets to the core conclusion. When you take something essential like housing and pull it out of the speculative market, when you decommodify it, as the source says, that hidden private tax that we all pay just for the right to live somewhere, it starts to shrink. It gets closer and closer to zero. And what that suggests is that high costs aren't some economic law of nature. They're the result of a structural choice.
Okay, let's bring this all full circle. Remember that 250-hour time cost for a private service? Well, according to this framework, only about 100 of those hours are for the actual value of the service you're getting. The other 150 hours, that's a full 60% of the time you worked. That is the private tax. That's the part the source identifies as pure extraction, going straight to shareholders. So in the end, this framework isn't pretending to have all the answers. It's really just a new lens, a new yardstick to measure things with. And it leaves us with a really powerful question to think about. We can debate economic theories all day long, but maybe the real conversation starts when we ask ourselves, how many hours of your one precious, finite life are you willing to pay in taxes you can't even see?